Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. I want to welcome everyone here tonight, and we're going to jump back into Acts on uh, chapter 5. Okay, then. We'll go ahead and get started with the concluding verses of chapter 4, the things that we had seen a couple of weeks ago. Was it started telling us about the early Messianic Jewish movement, and it was a community in the fullest sense of the word. They got together and they became a group, almost a family, as it were. And one of the definitions of the community is joint possession, enjoyment, and liability. Now, it may become a shocker to some of you that the latter parts of Acts 4 through chapter 6 describe what we could maybe call a Messianic Jewish communism. Now, not the communism it's a far cry from the communism that we see, this atheistic communism that of the 20th century. No, this was a voluntary theistic communism, or communism, that was this was communism in its purest form, and it was nothing like the evil communist regimes that say from the Soviet Union or Red China or whatever. And the entire population is forcibly dispossessed of everything that they own. And we know that communism today is pretty much being discredited, and I think it's possibly just a matter of time until you see Cuba, the communism of Cuba, will collapse, as well as the communism of North Korea. It was already seen communism in the Soviet Union collapse to a point, and Red China, they've changed so much. It's still much different than the communism of Mao Zedong. After from World War II up until the 60s and 70s. So, but that's kind of what they had back in those days. This experiment with the Messianic Jewish communism in the first century of the current era actually was pretty temporary. It did not last very long. And in the 20th century, the modern kibbutz movement in Israel was also very communistic. Let me go ahead and punch that up there. And again, but it was a voluntary communism. Usually the kibbutzim were also rather secular, maybe sometimes even atheistic, and although there were some religious kibbutzim. In many ways, the kibbutz movement was more communistic than even the former Soviet Union. Children were raised communally, staying in the children's dorms. They were raised by professional teachers and caregivers on the kibbutz, with minimal upbringing by the parents. Now, that freed the parents up to work on the kibbutz, and all the farm equipment and everything was communally owned. And this was kind of what we see in the Messianic Jewish community in these early chapters here in Acts. It operated somewhat like the Messianic, the modern kibbutz movement in Israel. Now, the thing that we had in Israel was necessary, I think, to get Israel and its economy jump started, but it has it has pretty much fallen by the wayside. There are a few kibbutz operations still going on in Israel. We stayed at one up in the north of the Golan Heights area. That was just it was right on the Jordan River. It was absolutely beautiful, the thing, but it was pretty much had settled into being a touristy kind of a bed and breakfast rather than, say, a small factory or manufacturing system or agricultural. So um, in recent decades, a messianic Jewish kibbutz had it's been reestablished in Israel, and it was called the Yad HaShmonah, and it literally means the eighth hand, or the hand of the eight. It was originally established by Zionist Christians from Finland. Now, this kibbutz is it's dedicated to the memory of 8 Jewish refugees from Austria who they managed to escape to Finland in 1938. But these people were turned over to the Nazi Gestapo in 42, and 7 of the 8 were murdered at Auschwitz. And there's only one of them, Dr. George Coleman, who survived, and he made it to Israel after the war. So the Christians, these Finnish Christians, that they founded Yad HaShmonah. They sought to be a blessing to the Jewish people of Israel. They knew that the idea of you bless Israel, you'll be blessed. So they established a kibbutz east of Tel Aviv after the founding of the modern state of Israel in 1948. And then in 1978, they were joined by a family of Messianic Jews, the Ben David family. And today there are maybe 15 families, along with about 10 single people living on the kibbutz, and it has wonderful biblical gardens, grape and olive presses that are designed like those from 2,000 years ago. So it's a touristy kind of a thing, a museum, tourists, so forth. And it has a mikvah, and that's a immersion pool, and it's got a watchtower, which you see right there. That would have been kind of what they would have had back in the day, and there was a threshing floor, and let's see, here's one of the wine or the olive presses or something that they would have had, and that's maybe that's more like a wine press. I don't know. There's some of them at that are in other parts of Israel that actually have a better representation of the various presses than this particular one, but it is something there. All right, this Yad HaShmonah has become a retreat center for Messianic Jews with accommodations for vacationers and even weddings. And so many non-Messianic Israelis also visit, so they get exposed to the good news of Yeshua in that way. And all income is put into a common account and divided equally among the members. 80% of the income comes from Israelis who rent the facilities, including prominent Israeli businesses. Much of the balance of their income comes from tourists who visit the kibbutz. So this is kind of a perfect model of how this early Messianic Jewish kibbutz operated. Those who had property would voluntarily sell them, and when there was a need in the local Jewish community, Messianic Jewish community. So all of this seemed like it was going pretty well. Now, chapter 5 begins with the classic good news, bad news story. All right, the good news was Barnabas. That was in chapter 4. We ended up with Barnabas selling a field that he had, and he laid it at the feet of the apostles for them to do whatever it is that they wanted to do it. The bad news part of this story, or on the other hand, which is the way that our translation here tonight starts out with, is Ananias and Sapphira. So Let's go ahead and read that, chapter 5, verse 1 through 6. Before we get into that, any comments or questions anyone may have at this point? And please do just jump in there, because we got time and so forth. So if anybody's got something to say, just jump in there. You should see some of our classes in the yeshiva that I'm in, where you got 50 people in the class, and yeah, it gets really rowdy with everybody jumping in where they want to, but it all works. So jump in there if you got something to say. So just unmute yourself down at the bottom left hand of that little crawl screen that's on your. All right, so Acts 5, 1 through 6. On the other hand, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, sold a property. He kept back some of the proceeds with his wife's full knowledge, and brought part of it and set it at the feet of the emissaries being the apostles. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, and keep back part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, was it your own? It was, wasn't it? And after it was sold, wasn't it at your disposal? How did this deed get into your heart? You haven't lied to men, but to God. And as soon as he heard these words, Ananias fell dead and died. Fell down and died. Great fear came upon all those who heard about it. And the young men got up, wrapped him in a shroud, carried him out, and buried him. Bada bing, bada boom, you're out of here. He's gone. Finished off the good story of Barnabas, and then it says, but on the other hand, it kind of reminds you of Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, is he's debating on this or that and the other. On the one hand, yes, and on the other hand, no, and on the other hand, maybe. And so this tells the other side of the story, as Paul Harvey would put it. This, on the other hand, introduces a sacrificial act that, on the surface, it looked just as generous as Barnabas in chapter 4:37, I guess. But in this case, the motive was quite different. Ananias' Jewish name, Hananiah or Hananiah, depends on where where you put the emphasis in what syllable there, means Adonai is gracious. And Sapphira's Aramaic name, Sapphira, means beautiful. Now, their names proved as ironic, really, as their behavior was hypocritical. The ancient Greek word for kept back, which is nosvizomai. Okay, I'm no Greek scholar, but nosvizomai, which it means to misappropriate or to keep back. This is the same word, actually, that was used of Achan's theft in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The Septuagint translation of the Old Testament. You'll find that in Joshua 7:21. The only other time that nosvizomai is used in the New Testament meant to steal, and that's in Titus 2:10. So here they're saying that he's holding this stuff back. It was actually a theft from God. But they had, keeping with my notes here, they had lied not only to man, but ultimately to God. And their actual sin was deceit and pride. The story of Ananias is to the book of Acts what the story of Achan is to the book of Joshua. In both narratives, an act of deceit interrupts the victorious progress of the people of God. That comes from a very famous commentator of Acts, which is F.F. Bruce. And my first many years ago in a seminary was that was the textbook that we had for the book of Acts was F.F. Bruce. So That's a good one to read if you need a book, or if you want a book on Acts. That's also a very, very good book. The penalty. It was okay. It was swift and it was final. I mean, there's just no coming back. He he was God. I mean, God said, "That's it. You're out of here." And so he died. Okay, here's a. But God knew Ananias's heart, and so that seemed that was to God. That was the penalty that was most appropriate. Now, the Holy Spirit had revealed to Peter that Satan had filled this Ananias's heart, so he had pretty much just gone over to the dark side, as it were, and said Satan has filled his heart. There was no more room for Yeshua in his heart. So um, I'm reminded sort of the judgment of the man who willingly and I think defiantly violated the Shabbat back in Numbers. It's actually Numbers 15:32 to 36. There, it's in the notes that he went out and picked up sticks. They just got through telling him, okay, you don't kindle a fire, you got the manna, you don't do this sort of thing, and he went out and gathered up the sticks, and the children of Israel looked at him and said, wait a minute, what are you doing? So they went to Moses and said, look what this guy's doing. So evidently it was a question in that he was just defiant. And the way I read it, he was defiant, and it was like, yeah, I'm going to go get some sticks, I'm going to start a fire, what you going to do about it? And so that God told Moses, okay, gather him up and put him to death, stone him. And so that was pretty much what God did here, only he didn't tell anybody else to do it. He did it himself. Boom, you're gone. And so I've read several comments during during the study for this thing. They said, well, um, did they actually die? Did they go to hell when they died, Ananias and Sapphira? Did they, did they go to eternal punishment? And the commentaries that I was reading came more from the eternal security side of people, and they said, well, no, not necessarily, because maybe God took them out before they um, their heart was totally gone, or whatever. But we don't know. It really doesn't tell us the condition of their soul, as it were, and how much what really happened to them after that. But just suffice it to say that when the Bible says that in the Olam Haba, the world to come, that there is no place for liars in God's economy, and in the millennium, and also in the eternity after the millennium. It says there will be no liars in heaven. So God put these guys out, and they were gone. So let's go ahead. Any questions or comments so far on that? Okay, let's look at then Acts 5, 11 to or 7 to 11. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter responded to her, tell me if you sold the land for this much. And she said, yes, yeah, for that much. And Peter said to her, okay, how did you agree to test the Holy Spirit, or the Ruach HaKodesh, or Ruach Adonai? Actually, in this part, it says the Ruach Adonai, the Spirit of God. Look, the feet of those who buried your husband are at the door. They will carry you out too. Immediately, she fell down at his feet and died. When the young men came back in, they found her dead, carried her out, and buried her beside her husband. And this great fear came over the holy community, all who heard these things. Where I needed to pick back up again. All right. And let me get my kind of regroup here and get my chat screen back up here so I can see if anybody says anything.
Yeah, looks good, Rabbi.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right, so let me go ahead and look back at Acts 5, 7 through 11. Um, after an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, and not knowing what happened, Peter responded to her, "Tell me if you sold the land for this much." And she said, "Yes, for that much." And then Peter said to her, "How did you agree to test the Ruach Adonai? Look, the feet of those who buried your husband are at the door. They will carry you out too." Immediately she fell down at his feet and died. When the young men came back, they found her dead and carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And a great fear came over the whole community and all who heard these things. Peter gave Sapphira a chance to tell the truth, but she didn't. She didn't do it. But by the same token, he didn't warn her ahead of time that by mentioning her husband's death or anything, because he wanted her to be totally candid, totally honest with her answers. And as we see, she failed the test miserably because he said, "Look, did you sell this land for whatever the price it was? Say uh, 1,000 shekels. Did you sell this land for that?" And she said, "Yes, we did. We sold it for 1,000 shekels." And so basically what they had done was they sold it for a much higher price, say 2,000 shekels or something like that. And then they reported to the apostles that, "Yeah, we just got 1,000 shekels for this land because real estate prices are just not doing not that high right now, and the economy's in the pits, and so we only got 1,000 shekels out of it. That's all." And they kept the other 1,000, whatever it was. You get my point, where they had sold it for more and then kept back some of it. And so we don't know if Ananias and Sapphira had a good marriage or a bad marriage, or if they agreed often, or if they fought a lot, or whatever. We don't know anything about that, but we do know that they agreed together that they were going to test the Lord. They were going to put the Lord to the test here, and they should have found agreement for the Lord, and instead they found agreement against him. So we don't know if Ananias suggested this, or if Sapphira just did, or Sapphira did, and they just came up with the idea together. We don't know anything about that. We know the end result, that if Ananias thought about it and pressured Sapphira to go along, he was wrong to do it, and she was wrong to go along. So the idea of submission to your husband does not extend to submitting unto sin. It's the idea that, the woman says, "I got to be submissive to my husband." Well, baloney. That only goes as far as it doesn't cause you to commit sin. If your husband is requiring you to sin, then that's where the obligation to submit unto his authority ends, because you don't have to submit to any authority that causes you to sin. All right. I know that's not really politically correct these days, but and it's an easy way out for somebody who says, "Oh, I couldn't help it. My husband said I couldn't do that. I had to do this or whatever." So, um, which is okay, as long as it doesn't mean that he's telling you to sin. All right. So it's fitting now. It's fitting that Sapphira suffered the same fate as her husband. She was guilty of the same sin as Ananias. And it says a great fear spread through the community. I would be afraid too. Sure makes you think about being less than truthful, doesn't it? Like I said, God said there's no place for liars in heaven, and this kind of proves it. So, anyway, any comments or questions right now about anything that I've said so far, especially the the part about submitting to your husband, wives. I hear it all the time. It's, well, I just can't do this or that and the other because my husband says I can't. I was in the matter of peace in the home. You might have to do some things, but that only goes as far as not that they were. I look at it as they were being defiant. They were really being defiant, and I disagree with some of the commentaries that say, well, they could have still gone to, maybe not lost out, and they didn't sell their soul, and so they would still have a place in heaven. They just made a mistake, and maybe they did. I can't judge for one thing or another, but to go ahead and suggest that that God was going to take them out right at that point rather than let them go on and sin. It's that is the argument of many of the eternal security folks, is that yeah, you may go and make your confession of faith, and it may be a good confession of faith, and yeah, you're saved. But then if you're living like the devil, then that God will take you out. That's the word I hear. He will take you out. Um, before you get to the point where you're eternally lost. I don't see that anywhere in the Bible.